Hello and welcome to episode 12 of The Journeymen, the podcast dedicated to the work of overlooked and underrated filmmakers. On each episode, we pick a filmmaker who we feel more or less fits that description, and then we work our way through their filmography in chronological order. My name is Bobby Lowe. I'm here with my co-host,
Michael Pattison.
Please follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen, and you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. Today's director is Chuck Russell. He has to date made 7 feature films. They are in chronological order: A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors from 1987, The Blob from 1988, The Mask from 1994, Eraser from 1996, Bless the Child from 2000, The Scorpion King from 2002, and I Am Wrath from 2016. So let's begin with his directorial debut, 1987's Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors.
I want us to talk about what happened last night. I want us to all get our feelings out in the open.
He wasn't strong enough, so he got wasted. That's all.
That's all? Is that what you think?
He couldn't hack it, so he got nailed. Period.
Oh, yeah. Big, tough badass. How long are you gonna last?
I'm gonna last longer than any of you.
Well, just go ahead and fight, because that's what he wants.
Who?
Who do you think? What does he want?
Just turn us against each other so we'll be weak, easy prey.
Horse shit.
No, she's right.
I think we're all missing the point here. Philip's death was a sleepwalking accident, nothing more.
Oh, I could see him up there. His face. He was wide awake. All the way down.
Well, then it was suicide. Philip quit. He gave up.
Joey says it wasn't suicide.
Listen to me, Joy. Philip killed himself. Now, that's a cowardly thing. That's an empty thing. He let himself down. He let all of us down.
It was murder. Can't you understand that? That bastard murdered him. I'm not going to listen to any more of this. How much longer are you going to go on blaming your dreams for your own weakness?
Later, how much longer you gonna keep blowing smoke up our ass?
That's enough, Kincaid.
There will be no repeat occurrences of last night's events. From now on, your doors will be locked during sleeping hours. We'll start a policy of evening sedation for everybody.
The fuck you will. Anybody tries drugs on me, get his ass kicked.
You just bought yourself a night in the quiet room, mister. Now sit down.
Fuck you. You sit down.
Easy, Kincaid.
Nobody gonna put me to sleep. Man, get away from me, man. Let me alone, man. I don't want to go to sleep. Ain't nobody gonna put me to sleep. I don't want to go to sleep. Man, ain't nobody gonna put me to sleep. Get your hand. I ain't going to sleep, but
Everybody stay in your seats.
Man, get your hand off. I won't go.
We'll begin sedation tonight, starting with him.
Oh, you can't. They'll be defenseless against their dreams.
A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is based on a story by Wes Craven and Bruce Wagner and written by Craven, Wagner, Frank Darabont and Chuck Russell, produced by Robert Shea for Heron Communications and Smart Egg Pictures, and distributed by New Line Cinema and released on the 27th of February 1987 in the US and on 30th of October in the UK and then 13th of November in Ireland. It made nearly $49 million from a $5 million budget. Premise is during an hallucinatory incident, young Kristen Parker, Patricia Arquette, has her wrists slashed by dream-stalking monster Freddy Krueger, played once again by Robert Englund. Her mother, mistaking the wounds for a suicide attempt, sends Kristen to a psychiatric ward where she joins a group of similarly troubled teens. One of the doctors there is Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp, who had battled Freddy some years before. Nancy senses a potential in Kristen to rid the world of Freddy once and for all. The following conversation in response to the film took place in October 2017 and originally aired as part of our previous podcast, The Habitus, on 26th of October last year. So we're going to listen to that, or you're going to listen to it, and then follow up with maybe one or two remarks that we've come up with since then. So I saw the first two films many years ago. My understanding is the third one kind of forgets the first sequel, right?
Yeah, I mean, none of the characters except for Freddy obviously returned for the second film, so it doesn't really need to do any retroactive continuity. But
the second one, I'm right in thinking or remembering that it was kind of a commercial flop, and they didn't really know if the series would continue.
No, it wasn't a commercial flop, but the fans didn't like it. It made money.
Okay.
But they weren't satisfied with the direction that the story had gone.
Right. I can't remember the first sequel, to be honest. I thought the third one was extremely good.
Yeah.
So we have Hedda Langenkamp returning from the first movie as Nancy, right?
Right.
And she's the one who understands the, let's say, patients of... Are they patients? Can we refer to them as such?
Yeah.
Patients of a young person's
they're patients.
Psychiatric ward.
Psychiatric hospital. Yeah.
And they're connected because to one another because they have dreams, a sort of shared dream space in which Freddy haunts them. And this is kind of a step up. My understanding of the first film was that it's a great kind of groundbreaking slasher film, but the third one seems to sort of up its game somewhat. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, visually, certainly.
Yeah.
And it expands the concept in certain ways. I think Freddy is a really great concept. Did you like the first one?
Yeah, but I can't really remember it as much. Like, I remember really appreciating the first one for, as I said, sort of becoming this, is it fair to say it, template on which slasher films... I mean, obviously, it's based itself on a certain sort of template with regard to that genre. I mean, you're much more, let's say, into slasher movies in general than I am.
Right.
But I was a fan of the first one, yes, to answer your question. This one, though, I thought was in a kind of different ballpark. It is regarded, this one, as the best of the series, right? Am I correct in saying?
I'd say probably the first one
The
is
first one.
More sort of the canonical classic, but a lot of people prefer the third. I don't know. I love the first and the third more or less equally.
So this film also features Patricia Arquette and Craig Wasson, an actor who I don't know from any other film, as Dr. Neil Gordon, who's sort of sympathetic to the patient's cause, right? And I think he has the hots for Nancy.
Right.
Which sort of informs his sympathy for the group, let's say. But I liked it because it's got sort of... I mean, obviously Freddy's the antagonist, but you would also expect in a film like this that their main difficulty is to be believed, right? And so you would expect sort of an antagonistic character, an authority figure that doesn't believe them. But I like that the fact that Dr. Neil Gordon is sort of sympathetic to their cause and wants to believe them, but he kind of misunderstanding them as well, right?
Yeah. He's very quick to believe Nancy when you don't actually see the scene where she says maybe you're ready to hear the truth, and then it just cuts away, and you don't actually, they kind of skip over the probably long conversation of her trying to convince him to just give her the benefit of the doubt.
Maybe she plays him a VHS of the first film. I actually have, in fact, Dream Warriors 3 on VHS, but you'll be pleased to know I didn't watch the pan and scan version of it because I won it on a film quiz as a prize in my final year of media studies at Gateshead College. And it was a Christmas. It was a Christmas quiz prize. No, I didn't watch it. No, only because I hadn't seen the first two. I thought, as a completist, I should watch those before I watched Dream Warriors 3. And by the time I watched the first two movies, the third one was up in our attic, so I never got around to watching it. But no, okay, so you mentioned the visual qualities of this film. I think the set pieces, which are, I don't know, like maybe you can give more detail about this, but I can imagine that the main draw to sort of the hardcore fan base is each film sort of follows the same template, right? You're always going to get Freddy going offing characters in succession through their dreams. And so the main draw from film to film is how they sort of come up with new ways to visualize these sorts of scenes and set pieces, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so the first film came out in 1984, at which point the teen slasher cycle was, 5-6 years old. following, for at least 4 years old, following Friday the 13th. So it had kind of started to peter out a little bit, and Nightmare on Elm Street kind of rejuvenated it. And in the late 80s, you got a lot of supernatural sort of inflected slasher films. But yeah, you're right. Certainly beginning with the fourth one, which was famously made in 8 or 9 months. New Line were cranking these films out at the same rate that Paramount were cranking out Friday the 13th films. But obviously these films are much more technically demanding. But certainly by the time you get to the fourth film, you can see that the script is being written around the set pieces.
Right.
So the murder set pieces are what the films are about. Yeah.
Yeah, and so let's say surrealism is embedded into the very concept of these films because the murders take place in a dreamscape, like a continuous dreamscape. So, yeah, I mean, the set pieces in this film are like technically demanding, but also visually. I mean, the way it's constructed, it's a memorable movie, right, to watch.
Yeah, very so. Yeah.
And it actually, funnily enough, it actually impacts your own dreams if you watch it late at night enough.
Really?
I did watch it late at night, and then I went to bed and I wasn't dreaming of Freddy Krueger, but I was my dreams were informed by the sorts of images that are involved here. So one character is sort of tied to his bed and hung over like a hell pit, right? Like his bed sort of disappears. Yeah. And his bed sort of disappears, and we get this bird's eye view shot of him with sort of a hell pit beneath him, which is visually striking. And I love that moment, like where Freddy in like some sort of giant snake form is like devouring one of the characters.
Right, that's the opening scene with Kristen.
Yeah.
But okay, so basically the premise here is that you have these, as you said, these characters who are all dreaming about this boogeyman that they're not familiar with, but they are aware that they're sharing this dream. They're talking about this common dream that they're having, but the people running the psych ward have obviously their idea is that they're experiencing some kind of group psychosis.
Yeah.
And then Nancy arrives and she believes them. But the other conceit is that Kristen has some ability to pull people into her dreams.
Yeah, Patricia Arquette's character.
Yeah, sorry, Patricia Arquette's character, Kristen, has this ability to pull people into her dreams, which is, in the original film, the concept of, to defeat Freddy, you have to wake up while you're holding on to him and you can pull things out of your dream.
Yeah.
So like there's a scene in the first film where in the dream she snatches his hat off his head and then she wakes up and then she's holding his hat. And that's how they figure out that, okay, if we can get a hold of him and then you can wake me up, we can pull him into the real world where we can destroy him. In this one kind of reframes, like Freddy Krueger has always been a ghost story, but it never really felt like a ghost story, or certainly never really felt like a traditional ghost story. In this one, they kind of embed the Freddy Krueger ideas into what is a very traditional ghost story, where you have the ghostly nun, who is revealed later to be the ghost of Freddy's mother, Amanda Krueger. Yeah. You have this whole thing about finding his remains and laying him to rest in hallowed ground, the unrestful spirit, which I like. I mean the scene at the end where they're at the funeral of Nancy, who also Nancy gets killed in this film. Where what's his name?
Dr. Neil Gordon.
Dr. Neil Gordon, he sees the nun walking like around the near vicinity in the graveyard, and he runs over to and he finds Amanda Krueger's grave. And the great scene in the disused part of the hospital where she tells him the story about how there was a young nun here or a young nurse who was locked in over the Christmas period in the asylum, and they said she was raped hundreds of times, and when she was taken out of there, she was barely alive, and she was pregnant, and then Freddy's referred to as the bastard son of 100 maniacs.
One of my favorite scenes or set pieces, one of the best murders in the film, let's say, is the one in which one character is kind of lifted into a television set and like electrocuted, and then Max, played by Lawrence Fishburne, credited here as Larry. Is it Max who finds her?
Yeah.
Walks into the room and just sees her body still hanging there from the television set. I mean, what a vivid image that is.
Yeah. My favorite murder scene in the film is the death of Philip, the first murder, where he's the puppet on his wall, comes to life, turns into Freddy, and then tears his veins out from his arms and legs and sleepwalks him as a puppet.
Yeah,
up to the top of the bell tower.
Along the corridors into the top of the bell tower. Yeah.
Yeah, and then throws him off, and you see Freddy in the sky, working the puppet strings.
Yeah.
It's incredibly visually well constructed. You know, you have this kind of like escalation of the imagery, and then eventually the kind of the visual punchline is Freddy in the sky.
And it's quite. I watched it with quite a grimace actually, because this idea of being led via your veins. It's visually well articulated, and also the character. It's established by that point that he does sleepwalk anyway. So when he first starts to sleepwalk, because we're seeing point of view shots from staff in the psychiatric ward, and from their point of view, they don't see the strings. And then when we come to sort of his point of view, you can see it because he's dreaming that. So it's incredibly well done.
Although I'm not sure how he walks him through the door. It never made sense to me. He somehow passes through the door, but he must that's okay in the dream, but in the real world, how does he fit? Anyway, whatever. That's my favorite thing. I think it kind of the kill sequences are structured kind of in reverse, where the best one is at the beginning, and then the later ones, like the one with Will when he's being attacked by the spiked wheelchair thing. He uses his dream power to turn into a wizard. Freddy just picks him up and stabs him. And it's like,
that's right.
There's not much to that one. I mean, as I was saying, the concept of Freddy Krueger has always been great. And what's great about it is the clarity and coherency of the concept, where like everybody needs to sleep, and you have these characters who are desperately trying to stay awake. And everybody knows that like it's just a dream. It's like this cliche phrase. Like your dreams can't hurt you. It's just a nightmare. But what if your dreams could hurt you? But you have these characters who are constantly trying to stay awake, but nobody can stay awake forever. So they have to kind of strategize how to, allow themselves to sleep and somehow find a way to defeat Freddy in the dream. But, I mean, I saw the new version of It recently, which is a lot of people have drawn connections between Freddy Krueger and Pennywise, even as far back as the novel, which I think was published in '86, so 2 years after Nightmare on Elm Street. But the problem with Pennywise is that he's a similar kind of character who kind of toys with the children.
Yeah.
And, he's a child killer. But there's no kind of like, when he fails to kill one of the children, there's no real logical reason why he's failed. Because he can kill them when they're awake.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
It's Freddy Krueger is a very, very strong concept like that. And they have in all of the films, they have this conceit of you have a character who's like real like heavy, heavy eyes, and they're like trying really hard to stay awake. They're doing everything that they can. The scene where is it? Oh, it is. It's Kristen in the opening scene where she's building the house, and she's like eating spoonfuls of like coffee grounds, and she's playing real loud music, and she kind of like nods off for a second, and then wakes up, and that's a conceit used throughout the entire series which if you think about it has never happened to you, where you would fall asleep, like you say, for example, you'd be in class and you'd be like really tired and you kind of nod off for a second, and you fall asleep and then dream. your dream is that you almost fell asleep in class, but then you didn't. But then it is a dream.
I get it.
Do you know what I mean? So there's like this conceit of like normally if you fall asleep and you start dreaming, you're somewhere else, but for the benefit of the audience, there's this conceit of like, the character is trying not to fall asleep. Oh, they almost fell asleep. Oh, they didn't fall asleep. Okay. Oh, but did they? Maybe they are asleep. So then it's gradually revealed to be a dream, and sometimes it's used as a twist. Sometimes they seem to be trying to deceive the audience, lead the audience to believe like, oh, they almost fell asleep, but they didn't. But generally, it's more like dramatic irony, where like the audience knows that the character is sleeping and the character doesn't. The character is slowly discovering, oh, actually, weird stuff is starting to happen, and I must actually be asleep. In the remake, they introduced the concept of micro naps, where like if you stay awake long enough, your brain just starts to shut down for microseconds. So in those microsecond naps, you can be pulled into the dream world.
But that's what happens as well, though. I mean, like, you know, when you, let's say, nod off unexpectedly, let's say if you're watching a film late at night, and films are kind of dreamlike anyway in that regard, but like when you nod off, when I nod off, let's say even in the cinema, and I wake up again, I've been asleep like for, let's say, 2 seconds, if that, and yet I feel like I've missed a whole chunk of the narrative, and you're playing kind of catch up, and so it affects your notion of time. And so I like this idea of like almost like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, like in real time it's kind of seconds or nanoseconds, but yet in that sort of spatial realm, time is also warped, so that a great deal can happen, like in this ostensibly narrow time frame, and indeed a great deal does happen. It also reminded us, maybe because I watched Dream Warriors days after seeing Mother, but it reminded me of the very funny scene in Mother, which we've already discussed, in which Jennifer Lawrence is trying to stay awake and Javier Bardem's just kind of watching over her, waiting for her to fall asleep.
Oh, with the baby, yeah.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
So insofar as the film alters the central concept from the original film, you've got the introduction of this kind of religious hysteria kind of angle, and the framing of the story as a much more traditional kind of gothic ghost story with crucifixes and hallowed ground and restless spirits and that kind of thing. And it also, I wouldn't be surprised if it was inspired to some extent by The Breakfast Club, where you have this kind of like group of misfits and outcasts who, you know, bond together and then also I think the introduction of the concept of the shared dreams is it kind of implicitly creates this kind of dream world as kind of like alternate dimension kind of thing, where it introduces a kind of a fantasy element. It's almost like something like Labyrinth, where you know, there's a kind of a parallel dimension that you can go to.
Yeah, and in this parallel dimension, characters kind of assume all the qualities that they want in real life. So, as you said earlier, one character becomes a wizard, the other's like this kind of super cool goth chick.
Whose death is also very good, actually, with the syringe fingers. It's Taryn, and she has the track marks on her arm that are little sucking mouths going.
That's a great visual effect.
Originally, her head was supposed to explode, but they couldn't get the visual effects to work. When he pumps
they couldn't get the actor's permission to.
I just think the whole film is just like on every level, on the level of visuals, on the level of concept, it's just like overflowing with imagination.
Yeah, and that comes back to what you said earlier about kind of front loading its visual information and best set pieces, almost like as a statement of intent, just to reassure audiences that, you know, we're back on track, and this is a sequel to the first one rather than a sequel to a continuation of the second film, which, as you said, fans weren't so keen on.
Right.
And it's I mean, it kind of hooks you from the start, and
I do think the very, very final scene with Dr. Gordon sleeping, and he has the house, the model house that Kristen has made.
Yeah.
That's a model of Nancy's old house. And then suddenly the light comes on in the house, and it's like, it's not over, which is the typical kind of like it's never over. Sequel bait horror ending.
Yeah.
But it like flatly contradicts everything that has come up to that point in the film, where it's like the rules are established here. Like Amanda Kruger, Freddy's mother, has said, you know, this is what you need to do to put Freddy to rest. You need to bury his remains in hallowed ground. And they do it, and you know, everything seems to be fine. But, you know, they got to make a sequel. They were probably already in production on part 4.
Yeah. Actually,
that's something that I forgot to mention, is like, just when you think it can't get any more visually impressive, you have like the stop motion skeleton of Freddy
in the climatic sequence. In
the junkyard. It's fantastic. Originally, Wes Craven's original draft of the film was taking Freddy in a much darker direction. but Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont, they took him in a much more sort of humorous, lighthearted direction, which continues throughout the subsequent sequels until Wes Craven came back for the 7th one. But certainly the 4th, 5th, and 6th make Freddy more and more of a kind of a joker. And the sequence that you mentioned with Jennifer and the TV, where Freddy appears on the talk show, and he becomes the talk show host. That sort of kicked Freddy into being this kind of like media figure, and gave him his own TV show and everything. Yeah, I think it's a great film.
Yeah, great film.
Do you have anything to add to it?
Not really. It would just be to reiterate what we said. I mean, I listened to the clip and, brought to mind again how much I like it. I like it probably more than I did this time last year. Obviously, when we discussed it last year, I was watching it for the first time. You were and are familiar with the franchise as a whole. I'm still not. But, as we said last year, it's such a visually vivid film that is, built out of these technically complicated but visually accomplished set pieces. Each one feels unique in itself. The characters are strong. I think it's a really strong directorial debut by Chuck Russell.
Does this film make you want to watch the remainder of the series?
Yes. Yeah, it does. My understanding is, I seem to have said my understanding a lot when we reviewed it, but my understanding is that this was the peak of the franchise.
The fourth one made more money.
Mm-hmm. But is it a better film?
No, but it's good.
Okay. No, I do. I think definitely since we, got to grips with and chronologically worked our way through the Halloween franchise, I'd definitely be up for doing something similar for Nightmare on Elm Street. Because I think, am I right to assume the Nightmare on Elm Street features are more different to one another than the Halloween franchise films are?
Nah, I wouldn't say that, really.
Nah? Okay.
Okay, so what's your rating for this 1 year later?
So I think last year I would have given it an 8. I'm torn between an 8 and a 9. So I'm going to settle for an 8.
Okay. For me, it's a 10.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Great.
Okay, alright, so moving on to his second film, 1988's The Blob.
Dr. Meadows, just for the record, I don't agree with any of this. Those people's lives are at stake.
Don't you think I know that? This isn't one of your textbook exercises, Mr. Jennings. This is an experiment in biological warfare, or hadn't you noticed? That organism is potentially the greatest breakthrough in weapons research since man split the atom. What we do here will affect the balance of world power. Of course, there are lives at stake, whole nations, in fact. And that's far more important than a handful of people in this small town. And that is my cross to bear, Mr. Jennings. I'll carry out your orders. Yes, sir.
Colonel, we've got a sighting.
August here. Colonel, we've got an eyewitness who says the organism pursued some civilians into the sewers.
It's got Kevin and Eddie and Meg down there.
We gotta do something.
Excellent. We need a schematic of the sewer system. We'll contain it down there. I want that organism alive.
What about the civilians?
They're expendable.
Okay, so The Blob, written again by Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont and based on the original 1958 story by Irving H. Millgate and screenplay by Theodore Simonson and Kay Lineker. Produced by Jack H. Harris and Elliot Kastner for TriStar Pictures and released in the US in August of 1988 and in the UK in June of 1989. Estimated production budget of about 19 million and a domestic gross of just over 8, so it was a big flop. Okay, so in a tiny California town, high school students Brian, played by Kevin Dillon, Meg, played by Shawnee Smith, and Paul, played by Donovan Leitch, discover a strange gelatinous substance that melts the flesh of any living creatures in its path. The deadly substance gets into the town's sewer system, where it begins growing uncontrollably, occasionally emerging to feast on unsuspecting townspeople. A military cleanup crew is sent in to eliminate the menace, but it may end up doing more harm than good.
Indeed.
You hadn't seen this one before?
I hadn't seen this one before, and I hadn't seen the original either, which is a Criterion Collection release.
One of their strange outliers, yeah.
Yeah.
Along with like Armageddon and Chasing Amy.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously because of its status as a Criterion release, has a certain critical consensus formed around it, as if it's like some sort of like Cold War classic. I must say that I found the original quite inert. Like it's lacking in suspense, it's lacking in scares, and most of that is down to the nature of the creature, like the blob itself, which is kind of almost a joke. Like,
yeah,
you know, it doesn't really move.
Well, I mean, the film even opens with a kind of funny theme song. You know,
it
creeps,
true, yeah.
It crawls, the blob. So I rewatched the original. I hadn't seen it in a long time. And it's I think it has a really quaint charm to it. It's one of those films that has, like, when you see 50s B movies parodied, it seems like that's kind of the archetype.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I love that, like, you got like 27-year-old Steve McQueen playing a 17-year-old, and Steve McQueen always looked older than he was anyway, so he looks like he's in his 40s.
Yeah, he looked old early and never quite aged.
Yeah. But it's interesting that you say that it now has this canonical sort of status, because this was originally supposed to be Chuck Russell's directorial debut before he was offered Dream Warriors, and he acquired the rights for, he says, pretty much nothing, because the film didn't have that status at the time.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like one of those like many forgotten 50s B movies. Okay, so moving on to the remake. What do you think of it?
Well, the original, its weaknesses means that there's a great deal to be improved upon. Premise and creature and otherwise. Like, there's no reason why the blob itself needs to be defined by a lack of mobility. And I think the remake is a marked improvement. Like, it's what I love about it are the improvement in the kills.
Sure.
And by extension, the creature itself, which does have a menacing, brutal quality to it. I like this film a great deal, and didn't expect to. So having watched the original, I didn't know what sort of cultural critical standing the remake had, and even has. I haven't really looked that much into it. Like, is it well?
No, it's not that well. It's not that well liked. No. I mean, I guess a lot of the criticisms that you just levied at the original are seen to apply to the remake as well. That the blob itself is just not a very inspired monster, which I would have to agree with.
Yeah, I agree with that, but
it's kind of going for a type of like an abstraction or something like that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
that maybe isn't. Because I mean, they're like this would fall into the sort of category of like what are sometimes called body melt movies. That were popular in the 80s with like films like The Stuff or Street Trash, where the appeal is like. I mean, there are even aspects of it like that. That's just something that's kind of, even the opening of the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where their faces melt, or like in Poltergeist, where the guy's face melts off, or whatever. Not that those are body melt movies, but movies that kind of emphasize that kind of imagery, which obviously is not part of the 1958 version. But no, I mean, I think it's like you've got The Thing and the Fly and so on. And these like maybe like Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers or whatever that are seen as kind of like really worthy updates of films that might have to do with the fact that the 50s Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing from Another World, and maybe not so much The Fly, but those two are sort of seen as legitimately great films in their own right.
Well, I was going to ask, would you agree that a lot of the Cold War creature features could benefit from an update?
I mean, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I would put it in those terms that they. I don't know if I would say update. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly like a lot of ideas in those films that you could take and make a kind of a contemporary film based around.
Sure. Yeah,
but like, I don't necessarily like that. The idea that you only touch a movie that, like, when you're remaking something that you pick a movie that can only be improved upon or something like that. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, you could just have a different take on the material. Like I wouldn't say that Philip Kaufman's Body Snatchers is superior to Don Siegel's. They're just really different. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this movie as well. How do you feel about the fact that, like, so like we have Paul and Meg, who are a teenage couple, and it's the way it's set up. I think we're encouraged to assume that Paul is going to be the protagonist.
Absolutely,
and then he dies in the first act.
Yeah.
And then the sheriff gets involved. And I remember the first time I watched this movie, I actually didn't understand what was happening, because the sheriff has this, he's got this like little sort of burgeoning sort of relationship with this woman who works at the diner.
Yeah.
And there's probably maybe the most famous death in the movie is when she's killed in the phone booth, where the blob completely envelops the phone booth and then crashes in, like crushes all the glass. And in that moment, she's calling the sheriff. And then when the blob envelops the phone booth, the sheriff's body is inside the blob. And it's so brief that I remember watching it for the first time and thinking, wait, what? We didn't see the sheriff get killed, because the sheriff just, like, he's on his way out and he's like kind of being positioned as like the new protagonist. At least we see Paul get killed. Yeah. The sheriff, it's just like he's just like tossed away. How do you feel about that kind of?
So I
does it feel purposeful or just
yeah? I simultaneously like the idea of the film developing in such a way where it's more of an ensemble piece rather than positioning any one character as, you know, the go-to protagonist or whatever. But it also perhaps at some point does become a dramatic weakness, because it doesn't give us a sure-footed standing by which to orientate ourselves as the film develops. So it becomes a little bit of a slave to its own strengths in a way, because it becomes a film that by default is merely just a succession of set pieces. So, like, you know, when the external organization comes into town, they're introduced quite late, it seems. And then it has a sort of final act purpose to it. But until that point, you're just kind of figuring out, like, who's who. And there's a really elongated front half of the film, really, where it's sort of establishing relationships and whatnot.
Yeah. And then undermining them by killing off the characters, yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of double-edged for me. I like it on the one hand. On the other hand, I do recognise it as maybe a weakness.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. You also have a priest character who takes a piece of the blob, and there's this little coda to the film where he's like, is he starting a cult or something like that? He's out in the middle of nowhere in a tent with some, like, you know, parishioners, and he has a little bit of the blob that was frozen and has now thawed, and he has it in a little glass jar.
Yeah, it's described as a tent meeting church service in a field on Wikipedia. So it's suggested that there's going to be some kind of sequel or follow-up.
I guess whatever. Yeah. I suppose it was that's the purpose of it. Because at the end of the original film, they freeze the blob with CO2, and then they fly the frozen creature to the Arctic, where it'll never thaw out.
What I do find something that's carried over from the first film, which I found very likable and agreeable, is the amicability of its young characters. Like they're you know, it's a film about, and I guess this comes from the sense that it's an ensemble piece as well, their need to cooperate. And another thing retained, or at least early on, is the sort of anti-police vibe, which is very present in the first film. Brian, as you said, played by Kevin Dillon, taunts one of the cops and then licks the deputy sheriff's face, which I found really very cool gesture.
There's a very in the original, there's a very kind of post Rebel Without a Cause kind of feel to it, you know, like the cops hate the teenagers, and it feels like, you know, like a drive-in B-movie cash in on the success of Rebel Without a Cause, as several late 50s B movies do. But yeah, I actually, in rewatching the original, I was really taken with the unexpected revelation that the teenage rivals are actually like really good friends. There's no antagonist really. There's no, aside from the blob obviously.
I like that.
And also then in both films we have this midnight drive-in movie kind of, or not drive-in but midnight movie that they're all going to see, and in this one it's the kids sneaking out to see something called Garden Tool Massacre, which is like some sort of mashup of Texas Chainsaw and Friday the 13th.
I love how irate the kids are getting at the person behind them speaking during the movie. It's like, I thought it was like, oh, this is the Journeymen. So did you note the early acknowledgements in this film of the original silliness, like references to condoms? And then that humorous cut from, I think it's the Blob's first attack, to then a kid slurping up jelly from his plate at tea time. So, you've got all those sort of references that...
And the setting, even, like the production design kind of, it feels like a movie town. It feels like it has this kind of like, 50s nostalgia kind of thing. Even the fact that like Kevin Dillon's character is like, he feels like he came from that movie.
Absolutely,
When I first saw him, I was like, I didn't know Ethan Hawke was in this movie.
Like Ethan Hawke's ugly brother. It's also got like, I don't know how to describe this. Like, those arrow straight, like, light beams that shoot through, like, trees that illuminate forests at night. So, like, when there's been some sort of crater from a meteorite landing or whatever, and then, tech teams set up camp and, light the site or whatever. It's just very, immediately for me, it's very evocative of that era, or at least that genre.
That's a very X-Files kind of thing.
Yes, definitely.
Like floodlights over the trees. I also love I think is the opening shot where it's a shot of the cemetery, and then it just pans left to the bleachers at a football game, and it's like the townspeople, the living and the dead. That was pretty cool. I think the weakness of the film is really its script, and I think it might be really attributable to that, reluctance, maybe not reluctance, but decision to undermine the protagonists as they're being set up by killing off the expected protagonists, because it does, like you said, it does sort of leave the film feeling like a series of body melt set pieces.
Albeit great ones.
Yeah, they're really good. What's your favourite one?
Maybe the first.
The death of Paul.
Yeah, when he's on the bed. No, the guy on the
old man.
Yeah. Like when his whole torso down has just melted away, and you've got just nothing left of his bottom half. It's really, really great. That was such a good image, and the guy who then gets dragged in through the sink.
Oh yeah, that's very good. Yeah, where he's reaching down he's reaching down the drain. Yeah, I love the death of Paul, where he looks up and the blob is on the ceiling, and then Meg comes in and he's kind of screaming and melting inside.
It is like the Edvard Munch monk, isn't it? Yeah,
that's good. Okay, all right. We move on.
Yes. What would you give this?
I'm gonna give it a 7.
Oh yeah. I'm going to give it an 8.
Okay.
Yeah, I really liked it. Despite those things, that we've mentioned, faults, or if they can be described as such.
It's funny because when I first saw the film, I gave it a 7.
Yeah.
And then rewatching it for this, I really expected for that to go up and to like it more, but I felt the same way.
Okay.
Like it's good, but
well, you're nothing if not consistent in your critical opinions. I should mention also that, the set piece later on when Brian's being chased by the guys in the white suits on quad bikes, did it remind you of Die Hard 2?
No, but I can see that.
Yeah, and also maybe by extension Inception.
Okay, so then after the Blob, in the early 90s, Russell was developing a film called Shiva for Interscope and Touchstone, about which I couldn't find any other information. He was also attached to direct an untitled biopic about former US government UFO scientist Bob Lazar for New Line Cinema. The nuclear physicist claims that in 1979 he was among a team of scientists recruited by US naval intelligence to conduct top-secret black engineering research on UFOs the government had captured and stored in the desert. Lazar was a senior staff physicist on the project. The producer, Michael DeLuca, said, "We went after it because we think there's something primal in people's fascination with unidentified flying objects and people thinking that it's true." And they had won the rights over... New Line had won the rights over a competing offer from Simpson Bruckheimer Productions and Steven Seagal. And DeLuca said, "Bob Lazar was confident that New Line wouldn't take his story and turn it into a cartoon. What makes his story intriguing, thrilling, and ultimately disturbing is the evidence suggesting that government-sponsored research on UFOs actually did occur." And it was going to shoot in late 93, early 94 for $8 to $10 million. Russell said, "This is a story that dramatically fills in missing pieces to one of the greatest mysteries of our time. This is an opportunity to create a thrilling film that will answer questions while moving the genre a step forward." And it didn't get made. And instead he made 1994's The Mask.
My book is about masks as a metaphor, Mr. Ipkiss. A metaphor, not to be taken literally. You're suffering from a mild delusion.
I'm going to prove it to you. But I am not responsible for the consequences. Just sit back and enjoy the ride, Mr. Expert.
You don't scare me, Mr. Ipkiss. Go right ahead.
See ya. Okay. You said Loki was a night god. Maybe it only works at night.
Mr. Ipkiss, I feel I should warn you that I don't work personally with really sick people. They're private institutions for things like that. However, if you would like me to arrange for a safe environment for you tonight, I can do that.
I've got to see Tina. But what do? I mean, do I go as myself or the mask?
If I tell you, you promise to leave my office right now? All right. Mr. Ipkiss, go as yourself and as the mask, because they are both one and the same beautiful person.
The Mask was written by Mike Werb, based on a story by Michael Fallon and Mark Verheiden, and a comic series, of course, by John Arcudi and Doug Mank. Produced by Bob Engelman for New Line Productions and Dark Horse Entertainment, and distributed by New Line Cinema. Released 29th of July 1994 in the US and on 19th of August in the UK and Ireland. It made $352.6 million from a $23 million budget, and its premise, according to Google, is when timid bank clerk Stanley Ipkiss, played by Jim Carrey, discovers a magical mask. It also says here a magical mask containing the spirit of the Norse god Loki, but that's not really confirmed in the film. It's spoken of by.
I think we're supposed to take that as what's
it
going
is.
on. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, right. So it discovers a magical mask containing, or not containing, the spirit of the Norse god Loki. His entire life changes. While wearing the mask, Ipkiss becomes a supernatural playboy, exuding charm and confidence, which allows him to catch the eye of local nightclub singer Tina Carlisle, played by Cameron Diaz. Unfortunately, under the mask's influence, Ipkiss also robs a bank, which angers junior crime lord Dorian Tyrrell, played by Peter Green, whose goons get blamed for the heist. So, funny way of formulating the premise of the film, I guess. This was a childhood favourite of mine. I guess I was 6 years old when it was released. I presume I saw it at the cinema, although I can't really remember that experience, but it was on, it was a much played VHS tape in my house. And I haven't seen it since becoming an adult. I can't remember the last time I saw this, in fact. So it's a funny experience rewatching a film like this, which was at one point so familiar to you. So you come to anticipate and recognize all of the beats, the scene-to-scene transitions, and yet your understanding of the film is enhanced by the references that you didn't get when you were 6 or 7 years old. So it's a funny one. So I have to sort of, when I was watching it, actively try to reorient myself in such a way that I was able to respond to it critically and not merely just like enter this sort of involuntary state of like consuming images and moods and whatever else. Do you know what I mean? It's the same. Like it's the same if I was to, you know, rewatch like Ghostbusters or Ghostbusters 2 or something like that. And each year when I rewatch Home Alone and Home Alone 2, they're so, my relationship to them is so sort of, proximity to them is so intimate that I find it difficult to have any sort of critical honesty.
Okay.
But I love this film.
Yeah, so do I. I think it's great. Which of the three? Because Jim Carrey became a superstar overnight in 1994 with Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all coming out that year. Which of those three is your favorite?
My least favorite is Ace Ventura.
Yeah, me too.
And my favorite.
Although I do like it.
But on the strength of having just rewatched this, I would say The Mask.
I'd have to say Dumb and Dumber, but I mean, I really like. This is not a film that like you. This was a childhood favorite of mine, but it's not a film that I had seen it several times in the interim, and I feel like I liked it more as I got older.
Yeah.
But the difference is that I grew to appreciate the more understated comedy of the Stanley Ipkiss side, and like you said, came to understand the references, like the 1920s Prohibition era gangster sort of tropes that are like, you know, we're in this kind of like fantasy edge city where it's set.
And then like the typeface and everything of the opening credits is like
you mentioned that we're not supposed to take or you were wondering whether we're to take the suggestion that Loki's spirit is in the mask. Originally there was a prologue that was to show the Vikings coming to the New World and deliberately to dispose of the mask to get rid of it. So Loki, I think we are supposed to take. Obviously, that's not in the film, so you could argue that, you know, it's just not there. But certainly that's the premise. I think this is. I was really impressed by the elegance of the script, the way that it's all structured together, the way we have, like, you know, we start off with Ipkiss, you know, late for work, and then we get the introduction of his friend, and then we get the introduction of Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz, in her first film role, and you know, their relationship is established, their kind of awkward, flirtatious relationship, and then she moves her handbag, and then we get a video feed from the camera hidden in her handbag back to when we're introduced to the villains.
Yeah,
you know, it's all very kind of like elegantly structured together,
and amazingly economic. Like, you know, the titles are still kind of coming up on screen when all of this information. I mean, maybe not that far into the film when Tina does appear, but he's definitely he's made it to work, and he's in the bank, and meaningful conversations are unfolding as the credits are opening. It's like, you know, it's what happens in, I guess, TV shows now. It has a wonderful gag-based rhythm to it. This or a rhythm-based gags. I don't know. Such as, like, you know, when he kicks his courtesy car and it falls to bits, like bit by bit, and just like the bodily rhythm, and it is a gag-based rhythm of Stanley sort of, you know, putting his tie in his mouth very daftly to, like, you know, counter his social awkwardness and embarrassment. It's really, really beautiful, and it is character-based also, not just gag-based, but it's character-based in its humour. Like, it's 18 minutes before Ipkiss turns into the mask, and those 18 minutes are a complete joy. Like, even as a kid watching this, I wasn't bored. And when you were rewatching this, did you have also The Nutty Professor in mind, which came out 2 years later, as a, you know, another alter ego based comedy, where, you know, the alter ego itself sort of brings out all of the repressed, internalized components.
It's good comparison.
And like The Nutty Professor, this needs to pay equal attention to the ordinary side of the character in order for it to work. Like, we have to be equally invested in Ipkiss and not just the mask.
Definitely.
Obviously, we remember this film through the mask, visually and otherwise, but it's actually Ipkiss for whom we care. So the mask character starts to like infect Stanley's confidence to the point where he begins to act differently even when he's without it, which is simultaneously important for the film to work, but frustrating because it means that in the final third, I think, we long for the mask to reappear.
Okay. Because in the final third, the mask is worn by the villain.
Yes, yeah.
And it's interesting, I think, like, Ipkiss and the mask are like polar opposites.
Yeah.
But Tyrell is just Tyrell with the mask on. He's just like, has superpowers, but his personality is pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah.
He's maybe a little bit more assertive, more sort of confident in his sort of like tyrannical impulses or whatever, but his personality doesn't really change. Maybe that's, I don't know if we're to take that to mean that he's not repressed.
Yeah, so
he is more himself.
To be villainous, you need to bring out those darker sides anyway.
Right. You know, this was originally supposed to be a horror film.
Yes.
The New Line wanted to make they wanted the mask, because the mask, the comics, apparently, I've never read a mask comic, but apparently they fall into the category of splatterpunk.
Yes.
And he's really violent and kills people, and they wanted to even take that in a darker direction, is my understanding, and turn him into kind of like a new Freddy Krueger character. So it's interesting that we said that Russell approached the Craven and Wagner script of Dream Warriors, which was going in a darker direction, and pulled it into a lighter, more fantasy-orientated direction, and then did the same thing with The Mask.
Yeah.
And turned it into a comedy, and really wanted to really like envisioned Jim Carrey in the role.
Well, you know, the premise that I read there, you know, he's described as a supernatural playboy exuding charm and confidence. Watching this in the present day environment, at this, you know, particular historical junction, a cultural moment, etc., you could even, you know, argue that this film's problematic, because the Mask is not a very nice guy. You know, he's like...
Well, that's interesting, because like Tina Carlisle, she's sent into the bank, to, you know, on the orders of her gangster boyfriend to case the joint, because they're going to rob it. She has the camera in her purse, but she does genuinely take to Stanley, and when Stanley then shows up at the nightclub, his friend promises him that he'll get him into the Cocabonga or whatever it's called, where Tina is the kind of the main house performer. It's a club owned by Tyrell. He doesn't get in. There's a kind of a mix-up, and he gets thrown into the gutter by the bouncers. And then he sees Tina, and they have another kind of awkward thing where she's clearly like charmed by his sort of, sort of adorable, sort of, what would you say?
Goofy charm?
Yeah, his dorkiness or whatever.
Yeah.
But, and his overt attempt to kind of like impress her. But the funny thing is that so then we have the scene where she dances with the Mask. Okay, he goes to the club as the Mask, and he dances with her, and he woos her just by dancing.
Yeah.
But then when he does the Peter Parker Spider-Man thing, where he pretends that he knows the guy who wears the mask and that he can set up a date for them.
Yeah.
And then he shows up to the date and sits on the bench with her and they're like overlooking Edge City, and they have this kind of like nice little moment, and then he says, "Okay, gotta go. My friend's gonna be here any minute," and she wants him to stay.
Yeah.
And then he goes behind the bushes and puts on the mask and comes out in this like green, you know, tornado.
Sure.
And then he does this like Pepe Le Pew kind of like sex pest kind of thing with her, but the second that she actually speaks to him, she instantly doesn't like him. She doesn't like his personality. So the only positive encounter that she has with the Mask is when he's not speaking. He's just like impressing her with his dancing.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. I'd actually kind of forgotten it. Like she very quickly leans more towards Stanley than the Mask.
But you know, that meant, but for that moment outside of Coco Bongo, which we actually see twice, because then we see like a fantasy version where he's like super cool when he's dreaming about, you know, before that actually happens. But like, something that didn't really square up for me is Tina's sort of positive inclinations towards Stanley, because have they had any correspondence since that first chat in the bank?
Yeah, outside the...
Yeah, so yeah, but other than that, like...
Well, that's two.
Yeah.
And then the third one is the one where... Okay, well... okay, so when he puts on the mask, it becomes like... Okay, so Stanley loves like Tex Avery cartoons and things like that, and that's part of the Mask's personality. He becomes like this live action cartoon character, and he breaks the fourth wall.
Yeah, smoking.
And the weirdest, I was like struck by the scene where, like, after he's dancing with Tina, and Tyrell and his henchmen come down and they, like, you know, pull guns on him.
Yeah.
And he starts doing all these like you know, cartoony kind of sketch things where he's a cowboy and he's a
torero,
an accountant.
Yeah.
The weirdest scene in the movie is when he receives an Oscar. there's like you know, an audience stands up in front of it.
It's the only one that doesn't work for me.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's really funny because it just makes me wonder, like, what Tyrell are what they're actually supposed to be seeing, because we only see it from because they're just kind of exchanging looks like, this is kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's not like reality has just collapsed around them.
Because we've got on the image itself, like silhouettes of like an audience, like a cartoonified audience.
Yeah. That's what I mean. We're seeing it from the camera's perspective, and it's all done for our benefit, but they're not seeing it from the same perspective. So, like, is there a little audience that just kind of materialized beside them?
I mean, it's funny, but when I say it doesn't work, I just it I don't know. Yeah, I'm figuring out or trying to figure out like what is actually happening there. Whereas all the other stuff.
The Mask. I think the Mask is like that's part of the kind of the weird sort of postmodern appeal of it for me, is that it strains against that kind of boundary, you know, of comprehensibility or diegesis. And you know, like I also love, I think one of the funniest, maybe I kind of get what you mean, that the Mask, the way that the Mask is passed on to Tyrell and we don't get Ipkiss as the Mask for a while is kind of maybe a problem to some extent, because some of the funniest stuff it reminded me of the joke in Seinfeld about everybody having a night guy and a morning guy.
Yeah.
And night guy likes to stay up late, but, you know, he's like, well, I'm going to be really tired tomorrow. Well, that's morning guy's problem, and morning guy can't do anything about it. The only thing that morning guy can do is oversleep enough times that he loses his job, and night guy doesn't have enough money to go out anymore. So it's like a little bit like that. Like, he wakes up in the morning and like the Mask has just like ruined his life. Particularly when he has the closet full of money. When the cop, because when he gets shot in the Cocabonga, his tie gets shot off and it turns into his weird pajamas. Yeah. I also think it's really funny how immediately antagonistic the cop is toward Ipkiss. Like, he just takes against him for no real reason. But that scene with where he wakes up in the morning and the Mask is just like completely turned his life upside down.
He sees the mask on the pillow and it's like, oh fuck, what have I done last night? It's so funny. Would you agree that, you know, the entire first Coco Bongo sequence, before Tyrell even figures out that he's there, is great? Like, the dance, like, you know, I keep mentioning rhythm, but like, oh my god, it's so transportive. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. One thing we didn't mention is the reporter Peggy, who I also forgotten about that twist that she betrays him and hands him over to Tyrell. I thought that was really cool. So the film also has great bit characters, like the mechanics who are fixing his car and kind of like, you know, screwing him by, like, you know, saying that he needs a complete, like, transmission change or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you know the garage that they're in is actually the garage from Ghostbusters?
Ghostbusters, I was just going to say. I didn't,
So, one thing I was wondering is, to the extent to which he kind of casts a spell on people when he turns into the Mask. It's like they can't resist him. Like the thugs who he, like, starts making carnival balloons for and stuff like that.
Tommy gun. Sorry, son, I got rabbit head up down.
And obviously the scene where they do the conga line with the police and all that.
Yeah.
One thing that I would wonder though is I don't think, like, we see that Ipkiss likes to watch cartoons, but I don't think he's established as like a pop culture junkie in the movie.
Yeah,
which would explain the Mask, broadly speaking, because the Mask doesn't just do Tex Avery cartoon stuff. He does all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
like, you know, and it reminds me a little bit of the character that Jim Carrey plays in The Cable Guy.
Right.
You know, so he's like, you know, he was raised, like, in The Cable Guy, he's kind of like a cipher. We don't really know anything about his past. He just represents like this sort of archetypal child raised by television.
Yeah.
And it's like they're going for that maybe with the Tex Avery cartoon stuff. Yeah. But, like, it's, you know, I don't know. It doesn't really... what we see of the Mask doesn't really necessarily feel like it comes from inside Stanley Ipkiss that we see.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one other question I had this time is, why does the mask take the mask off?
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any motivation for it. Like, you could establish that he can only exist in that form for a certain amount of time, and then takes the mask off or something like that, but he doesn't...
Yeah, why would he want to stop that?
Yeah. He seems to be having a blast.
He does seem to be having a blast, yeah.
And the other thing that isn't explained is why he can conjure anything out of nothing. But he can't conjure money, he has to rob a bank.
Yeah, well, yeah. Let's not nitpick. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the most satisfying things about this is when, as the Mask, he sort of delivers a sort of comeuppance to characters who have done him wrong, as Stanley. So, like, you know, when he goes up to the Coco Bongo and he's just like, maybe you know my friends, and he's just got loads of dollar bills, and he just, like, throws them up in the air, and, like, as you said, it's a good way to put it, casts a spell on the people who have been sort of mistreating him.
I also love the scene where where Ipkiss goes to the guy, the author of The Masks We Wear, and he's trying to get him to believe
what we just heard in the clip, yeah,
and he's like, you know, like, I'll show you. So good.
Do you not think
it only works at night?
Do you not think when he puts that mask on, he looks like Bill Pullman?
No.
It's a spitting image. It is. It's Bill Pullman.
Okay, all right. So, your rating for this one?
9.
Me too. 9.
Yeah.
Okay, so after The Mask, in January of 95, Russell was attached to direct a film called Kilobyte, which is described as a science fiction thriller in which society has become addicted to virtual reality machines. And that was part of a deal that Savoy Pictures made with Sylvester Stallone. But obviously that didn't materialize. And also in October of 95, for Turner Pictures, who were in the process of tapping their deep library of Hanna-Barbera properties, he was attached to direct an adaptation of The Jetsons that was supposed to start shooting in mid-96 for a 97 release. So his next film was 1996's Eraser.
That weapon, or whatever the hell it was from your company, it was from Cyrus, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's an EM prototype. It's not even supposed to exist.
EM?
Electromagnetic pulse. No gunpowder, no conventional bullets. They fire aluminum rounds at almost the speed of light.
You're talking about the railgun?
Yeah, that's another name for them.
The Navy has been working on them for years. The smallest one I've ever heard of is mounted in a battleship.
Cyrus was contracted to scale them down. To design a compact hypervelocity pulse weapon. The most powerful assault rifle on Earth. They took millions, then they said the physics were impossible.
It looked real enough to me. Maybe Cyrus found a higher bidder.
Well, they're connected everywhere. Defense, CIA, NSA. Maybe even your people, for all we know.
You still want to put them away?
Yes.
I'll hide you until the hearings. No one will know where. Not my boss, not Witzek, no one.
Can you do that?
The feds knew this is going to be a death sentence for you. They let you walk right into it.
I was stupid.
You trusted them, that's all. Now trust me.
Okay, so Eraser, written by Tony Puryear and Wallen Green, with apparently uncredited contributions from John Milius, Frank Darabont, and William Wisher Jr., produced by Ann Copelson and Arnold Copelson for Copelson Entertainment, and distributed by Warner Brothers. Released in the US in June of 1996, in the UK and Ireland in August of 96. The film had a $100 million budget and grossed $242 million worldwide. So, you know, it did okay. This was kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger's last, I mean, with the exception, obviously, Batman and Robin was the following year, but it was kind of like his last really big movie that was like a star-driven movie as opposed to, like, you know, another entry in the Terminator series or whatever.
Yeah.
Really wasn't that much else, you know. He did End of Days, and he did The Sixth Day and Collateral Damage and stuff like that, but this was kind of the last one that was, you know, the last gasp with his, like, his real megastardom.
Yeah.
Okay, so the plot here. John the Eraser Kruger, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, is the top gun in the U.S. Marshal Witness Protection Scheme. He erases their past and deals with their future. His latest assignment is whistleblower Dr. Lee Cullen, played by Vanessa Williams, who has evidence against a major arms corporation that's selling weapons to terrorists with the collusion of rogue enemy agents within. But there is danger nearer home for Kruger from within his own department, because as it turns out, his friend and colleague, Robert De Guerin, played by James Caan, is in on the conspiracy. So this is another one that I had seen once, like a long time ago, and another one that I had exactly the same reaction to this time, again, hoping to like it more than I did the first time. It's a strangely low-concept film for Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, the idea, like, really... Well, actually, first of all, like, he's established as someone who works in witness protection, but he's spoken about in the movie like John Matrix is spoken about in Commando. Like, he's, unstoppable, the best of the best, But, like, why is he? He just works in witness protection. He just relocates people and protects their identities. Except for the fact that throughout the movie, I thought this was an absolutely hilarious feature of the film, is that he just gives away the identities of all of his other assignments. Like, he's protecting Dr. Cullen, but in doing that, he's bringing her to all these other people who he has previously assigned new identities and, erased.
Yeah.
But, like, he's just, like, blowing their cover one after the next.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
Pretty shit at what he does.
Yeah. It's quite funny. It's like he's calling in favors from them. It's like, that's his job. They don't owe him favors in return.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah.
But so I said it's low concept. It's, the only hook the movie has is that the weapons that they're selling are kind of novelty weapons. They're
plasma rifles,
a rail gun they call it, which is like something that's only like it's like the minigun in Predator. That's like, it doesn't exist as a handheld weapon. It's something that's like mounted to some sort of attack vehicle. This is a handheld rail gun that is able to shoot through walls and stuff like that. And initially at the beginning of the film, they use another kind of novelty weapon, something like it's like a cluster bomb kind of thing that shoots like little spikes or little nails or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's going to be the hook of the movie, because I didn't really remember. I remembered the railgun, but I was like, okay, well, it's going to be almost like James Bond or something. They're going to have loads of little cool, quirky devices to use throughout the movie, but they don't. And I think it misses a trick there.
My key problem with this, or my main problem, is on the one hand, as you said, it's low concept, for an Arnold Schwarzenegger mid-90s film. On the other hand, it's way overlong.
It's definitely overlong.
It's so bloated.
It's very long.
And like, other than that introductory, well, I guess it's blatantly becomes purposeful because it introduces us to a character who, as you said, he asks a favor from. But other than the opening sort of set piece, it's 30 minutes for the first like thrill. Like, that's that sequence where when Kruger shows up in his Let's Party uniform and protects Lee from plasma rifles, and we get that nasty little nail bomb happening. But Lee's partner in that set piece, Daryl, is killed, and it's of no consequence. Like, the next fucking scene, she's like, as we've just heard in the extract.
Yeah. Well, they had broken up. Like, he was there uninvited.
Yeah, but like, yeah. Fair enough. They're
not plasma rifles though. They do shoot bullets.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. But it's something that then, I don't know if it originated in this movie, the idea of a handheld railgun. It shows up in loads of video games later on, like Perfect Dark and things like that. I think Perfect Dark is the one where you have the railgun, you can shoot through the walls.
Yes.
You can see,
that's true.
But, so there are two really, really cool sequences in this movie. The first is the airplane escape sequence.
Yeah,
is very good fun because in fact, it kind of plays that part of the same sequence. No, it's not. Sorry, it's not. So where he's James Caan's character, Robert De Guerin, reveals his. I mean, like this is like when we spoke about Shadow Conspiracy with Donald Sutherland. Like, the second you see James Caan, you're like, he's in on it. Like, he's the baddie.
Yeah, guess who's the bad guy?
Yeah, so he reveals his involvement in this conspiracy to...
It's just less than an hour into the film.
To Kruger, while they're on this plane, he's basically said that he Kruger has taken Cullen and hidden her somewhere. And
Yeah.
nobody knows. He works alone. He says, nobody knows where he has complete autonomy to relocate these people. And James Caan says that, he pretends that his own witness has been compromised and they've killed his witness, or not his witness, but his, the person that he's been charged to relocate and protect has been killed, and that they need to find, Cullen now. And Kruger tells them that she's in Atlanta. So they start flying to Atlanta, and then he gets drugged on the plane. Anyway, so there's the big escape sequence where he jumps out of the plane, but it doesn't stop where you think it would stop. It's like James Caan says, he's like parachuting down, and James Caan says, turn around. I want to see him splattered on the windshield or something like that. So they turn this like huge like passenger plane around and like try to run him over in the air. That's pretty funny. And then the other one is a scene that I really loved, like absolutely adored, was when they're in the zoo and he shoots the glass, and they're in the reptile house, and the glass breaks, and I thought they were just going to get swept off their feet, but no. All these crocodiles come like streaming out of the
crocodiles are
the enclosures. Well,
I know you love crocodiles.
Crocodilians. I don't know. I don't think it's specified. Okay. But and then they get eaten by the crocodiles. I was like, that's so good. It's so amazing.
Not only eaten by crocodiles, growling crocodiles that like fucking emit sounds. Sorry,
and graphically killed as well. Like really graphically killed.
I love the idea, like anything like that, where at the very moment of being unleashed, the only thing on the mind of like these animals or creatures is like, yeah, we're just gonna eat these people, systematically devour them.
Yeah, and then we've got that actually reminded me of the other scene with the crocodiles that I love in Ridley Scott's Exodus, where it's just like I couldn't believe how good that scene was.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's definitely a highlight of the movie. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are the two highlights for me.
Yeah.
I wish that there were more. I think it's an obvious thing to do, and it's weird that they don't do it. Like have more unusual gadgets, because the whole premise is that this experimental weapons company. Like, why do they just limit themselves to that one gun? It seems like a waste. You've got, oh god, the scene where James Caan kills his witness.
Yeah,
and he like lies on top of her, and like. He first of all he shoots her, and then he lies on top of her and puts his like mouth over hers and holds her nose.
Yeah.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger walks in and he's like pretending to be resuscitating her. It's like, it's not convincing at all. He's clearly murdering her.
Yeah.
What else is good in this? Oh, like I mean, like so he takes Cullen to this woman that Mei Ling is her new name, and he takes her to her and reveals her identity, and then he takes her to this priest, Father Rodriguez, and reveals his identity, and then he takes her to the bartender Johnny and reveals his identity. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah, Johnny Castiglione, who's working in a gay club.
Yeah, and then he ends up enlisting his union mob friends to kind of help with the final firefight at the docks where the big deal is going down.
Yeah. How did you feel about that?
Their involvement, or them as characters?
Yeah, just their involvement in this showdown, which obviously is sort of encapsulated through the one-on-one duel between like Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Caan. Like, what the fuck? Like, so hold on. Can I just say I agree that it's not surprising that James Caan is the baddie. Sorry, but it does. I do agree. It does lead to that kind of against the odds, back against the wall scenario on the plane that plays out very, very satisfyingly. But it does mean that in the final like duel, it's Arnie versus like fucking like quite an old James Caan. Like there's no real physical challenge there. They make the most of it. When
they don't make the most of it because they could have included all sorts of novelty tech in that scene, and like that could have evened the odds a little bit between them. I agree, but that to me is the real miss here, because like that is the only high concept aspect of this. Everything else plays out like a pretty boilerplate, conspiracy thriller kind of thing.
Well, so my question was, sorry, what do you make of the fact that the final duel, as I said, is between Arnie and James Caan, but around that and leading up to that, you've got like this fight between two groups of people, like the mafia basically, who arrive on the docks, and like there's this whole thing about like no one comes on the docks if they're not part of the union or whatever. It's just like whatever.
And it's kind of played for laughs.
Yeah, it is.
It's fine. It's all right. It's whatever. And they're facing off, and it's supposed to be this kind of like comic. I don't know, like they're undertrained and underequipped, but they're still kind of able to get the best of these like highly trained mercenaries equipped with like experimental weapons.
So the mobsters deploy the features of the docks against those guys in order to outsmart them because they're familiar with the environment, I guess. And there's that one moment where I think 3 of them like show up in the loader bucket of it's not a tractor, but one of those kinds of vehicles,
like JCB or whatever.
Yeah, and you're right, it is played for sort of like laughs,
like a kind of a triumphalism.
Yeah,
like they're the underdog and getting the best of these guys or whatever.
Sure,
whatever. I don't really have anything else to say about this one.
Did you note the like the sort of intertextual references to other Arnie movies? Like "I need your clothes," he says at one point, and he also says "Get out." Like, did you by the way like True Lies, or do you like True Lies?
I do like True Lies. Yeah,
it's been years since I saw it, maybe 12 years in fact. And I don't particularly like it, but having not seen it for a while. But at least True Lies has a certain outlandishness to it.
I mean, this does in those 2 scenes that I mentioned, and I wish there was more of that. And if you had incorporated more of the novelty weapons and devices into it, I think that could have worked as well. And I also agree that like maybe James Caan needed somebody like a kind of a not a sidekick, but a
henchman. A
henchman is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, so like a henchman who's a little bit more physically imposing.
Absolutely,
that could have worked.
Yeah,
but it's fine. It's an okay film. What's your score?
5.
I'll go with a 6.
Would you?
Yeah.
So you like it with qualms?
Yeah.
With reservations? Yeah, nah, it's a 5. I'm actually inclining towards a 4 here, talking about it. But nah, it's a 5.
Okay. All right. So after Eraser, Chuck Russell was attached to direct the score for Horseshoe Bay, which is the heist movie that was eventually directed by Frank Oz in 2001. That was in May of 98. In July of 99, he was going to work with Arnold Schwarzenegger again because he and Frank Darabont were going to adapt Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, for Castle Rock Pictures. That's the 1930s comic about a millionaire philanthropist turned Superman. The brainchild of pulp author Lester Dent. First appeared in Doc Savage magazine in 1933. Warner Brothers turned Savage into a campy, critically panned feature, Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, in 1975 with the tagline, "Have no fear, Doc Savage is here," which was directed by Michael Anderson. And according to Variety here, it was unclear whether Darabont or Russell was going to direct, and the president of Castle Rock, Martin Schaefer, said Frank and Chuck got back a long way, and the 2 of them brought the project to Arnold, and then the 3 of them came to us. Once we have a script, we'll determine who'll direct. That's actually now a Shane Black project with Dwayne Johnson.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they're working on that together. And then in April of 99, he was attached to direct Evermere, which is a script by David Goyer, described as being in the vein of Star Wars, with elements of The Wizard of Oz and The Man Who Would Be King. The first of an intended trilogy of fantasy epics dealing with a 17-year-old orphan who discovers that in an alternate universe he is heir to a throne. He is then transported to the other side and must battle his uncle who has usurped the throne. But his next film was 2000's Bless the Child.
Do you believe in the devil?
Literally? Of course not.
Well, Eric does. And so do the sick fucks that are in with him. So would you if you've seen what I've seen.
Like what?
Eric's got this religion. Only it's more like the opposite of religion. I thought it was all bullshit at first, but I've seen it work. They can predict the future. Even make things happen to people. Bad things.
What does this have to do with Cody?
About a year ago, they all started acting a lot weirder than usual. They started hunting down kids. 6-year-old kids. Boys, girls. But they all had to be born on this certain date. They'd take each kid and put them through this test. And if they failed, they'd kill them. The slaughter of the innocents, they called it. Only Cody isn't like the other ones. She's the one they've been looking for all along. So instead of killing her, Eric's gonna try to change her, to make her just like him, so he can use her power.
She's just a little girl.
She's more than that. At least she's gonna be.
Gonna be what?
A saint, a prophet. She's gonna lead people to God, Maggie. A lot of people. Only Eric won't let that happen. If he can't turn her, he'll kill her.
Bless the Child was written by Tom Rickman and Clifford Green and Ellen Green, based on a novel of the same name by Kathy Cash Spellman, produced by Mace Neufeld for Icon Productions and distributed by Paramount, released on the 11th of August 2000 in the US and on the 5th of January 2001 in the UK and Ireland. It made only $40 million worldwide from a $65 million budget. When Maggie's sister Jenna, Maggie played by Kim Basinger, Jenna by Angela Bettis, when Maggie's sister Jenna saddles her with an autistic newborn named Cody, she, meaning Cody, touches Maggie's heart and becomes the daughter she has always longed for. But 6 years later, Jenna suddenly re-enters Maggie's life, and with her mysterious new husband, Eric Stark, played by Rufus Sewell, abducts Cody, Cody now played by Holliston Coleman. Despite the fact that Maggie has no legal rights to Cody, FBI agent John Travis, played by Jimmy Smits, takes up her cause when he realises that Cody shares the same birth date as several other recently missing children. Had you seen this before?
Yes, I had seen it. I saw it when it came out on video. And I remembered nothing about it, and I was actually surprised that it's not an evil child movie. I was confusing it with, I don't know, nothing in particular. Probably just it's one of those, millennial anxiety movies about theological horror sort of things.
Yeah, well, it's talked about often in reference also to Lost Souls from '98 and Stigmata from '99.
Yeah.
Neither of which I've seen.
I've seen Stigmata. You also have Fallen from '98 with Denzel Washington.
Sure.
End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger from '99. So there's quite a few. This one seems to have missed the mark a little bit by coming out in 2000.
Yeah.
Although they don't make there's not a huge amount in it about, or is there even anything in it about the Millennium? It feels like there should be.
Yeah.
Maybe they cut it because they missed their release window. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, it does. It definitely feels like the cult in this is doing what it's doing in anticipation of the Millennium.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, I had seen it before. Remembered almost nothing about it, and it has a really bad reputation.
Deservedly, would you say?
Deservedly? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's a bad film. In fact, I was like the first half hour or so of this, I was like, this is actually good. I'm enjoying this. It gets worse the more into... I would also, reference The Devil's Advocate from 97.
Sure.
It was quite reminiscent of that in terms of some of its imagery and also its kind of seeming sort of prestige aspirations. I think it's okay. I mean, it gets worse as it goes on.
Yeah, which is never a good thing.
No, but the first half, I think the first half is fine. I don't know that I would necessarily classify. I just said theological horror, but I don't necessarily think I would classify it as horror. Really, it's more of a crime film. Really,
yeah. It has its moments, doesn't it? Like, so
yeah, with obviously it has horror elements, and it's like that's part of it, but it's more like the demons.
Yeah, it's weird.
She sees they never interact with them or anything like that. So there's no real like and we also don't spend any time really with the cult. The time that we spend with the cult, we spend with Eric Stark mainly like in his plush penthouse apartment, or else, we never really spend any time. Like we never spend time in the cult, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
like she encounters the cult outside, like in the subway when they kill Christina Ricci's character, which is a good scene, I think. They decapitate her, and that's the first scene where we see the demons. I actually really liked the use of those demons where the cult members are beating her to death.
Yeah.
And the demons are kind of like flapping, sort of enthusiastically, like relishing the spectacle of it.
Yeah.
That was quite cool. And the structure, I think the structure of it is quite good as well. You have 3 different plots, all sort of like slowly converging on each other. The police investigation, you have, Kim Basinger trying to get the kid back, and you have Eric Stark trying to turn the kid. So the premise here is that the kid is basically like the second coming of Christ, right?
Sure, yeah.
And he's trying to get the kid to, like Ian Holmes' character who plays a priest in this, he references a painting that's like the temptation of Christ, where Satan is tempting Christ. And it's the same sort of thing here, like where Eric Stark is a Satanist who's tempting, not tempting, but sort of trying to pressure the kid into accepting Satan and rejecting God. Well, you hadn't seen it before, had you?
I hadn't seen it before. I think this is a pretty mediocre film, or it's a mediocre script. I think actually its problems are structural. It's weird to hear you say, or it's interesting that you say that it has a good structure. It has a darkness to it at certain moments that I liked, by which I mean a more sort of quotidian aspects, such as, child abduction. There's that really kind of dark, good scene where the kidnap the kid and put him in the back of the van. But the satanic underpinnings of it all don't really work for me at all.
I
agree. It's largely down to the shitty CGI and the sluggish storytelling. I found myself doing that thing again where I was figuring out all of the meaningful relationships that are kind of around which the film rotates or pivots. So you've got Maggie's relationships to, firstly, Cody, then to Jenna, her relationship to the cops or the FBI, and then to Christina Ricci, who, as you said, is dramatically killed off prematurely, you might say, and then to Ian Holm, the Reverend, who's introduced to give some explanatory shit with about 30 minutes to go. None of these relationships for me felt particularly purposeful, and they didn't really intertwine in such a purposeful manner. The cops seem to just keep disappearing for large chunks and then show up again only when something needs to be explained. There might be a good film to extract from this or to re-edit, but it's interesting to also hear you say that we don't spend much time inside the cult, if any time at all. And I think that's a structural problem, because it's positioned
I agree, yeah.
or structured around an investigatory angle. Or that's the sort of structure of the film, is an investigation into this cult. I don't see why we aren't given access to it.
We see when they abandon their headquarters, the police go in with a UV light, and we see the room in which the children who have previously been abducted have been sacrificed, and the satanic symbols painted on the walls in their blood that have been cleaned and painted over. But we don't ever spend any. But also, the only time that we do actually spend with the cult in terms of, while they're kind of in the process of performing their rituals, is at the end in church, and we see that the cult is made up for some reason exclusively. I think the premise is that this Eric Stark guy, he kind of preys on young lost people the way the cult leaders do. But the problem here is that your cult is made up entirely of punks and goths, like teenagers. It's not that menacing, So that to me is the biggest problem. It's one of those films where I would say it's one of those there's a good film in here somewhere films.
Absolutely. What do you make of that set piece? Sorry,
I think we had the visions of demons. We also have angels showing up periodically to help the protagonists and kind of reassure them. Although they don't appear, the demons actually appear in a demonic form, whereas here the angels appear as just humans. And the other big problem for me is that Eric Stark is not a strong villain. And he looks a bit like a baby-faced Tom Sizemore.
Yeah,
see that?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I mean, not as much as Bill Pullman as the mask,
as the wooden mask.
The wooden mask, yeah.
And we have there's the funniest scene. The nanny who literally turns into a demon at one point. In fact, it's the same scene earlier in the same scene where they've taken the opportunity of Cody being taken to the dentist as an opportunity to get her back, to re-abduct her.
Yeah.
The priest is waiting in the car outside, and she comes out and stabs him in both eyes with knitting needles.
Yeah. It's a great image.
Then the dentist comes running out. It is the dentist, isn't it, who comes running out and gets hit by a car?
Yeah.
That whole scene plays out quite amusingly.
What do you make of the set piece? I guess it is a set piece where Maggie wakes up going the wrong way in a 3-lane carriageway on a bridge, and then some dude just comes and rescues her. I was like, what?
That's an angel.
What's going on here? Yeah, but yeah, as I said, some dude. But like, yeah, it's an odd scene, though.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's weird. And then she's presumed dead because nobody saw her being rescued. So the angel somehow kind of like manipulated people's perception. I don't know. I mean, like the movie is kind of like I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you that it's mediocre, but like I don't know.
But it's not just it's mediocre. It's a bland treatment of a mediocre script, I think. Like there's something very perfunctory about the production values, and like, you know, I don't know what the background was or production history was here, but like it seems to have informed even the compositions at Russell's disposal as a director. Like there's something like a bit cheapish, for instance, about that scene when Sewell's going to throw Cody off the roof, and just the shot setups that Russell utilizes or deploys in sort of spatializing the scene. It just seems a little bit like, you know, when I was watching the film, I was like, I can't imagine even having the chance to watch this on a big screen. Like, it didn't really feel like a cinematic experience, if you know what I mean, in its lighting and otherwise, and it just felt like a direct-to-video sort of film.
Is that a criticism, though?
I don't want it to be, but it is. Yes.
Well, I mean, there's lots of great stuff produced for video and for television.
No, there isn't. There isn't.
No, I actually think the production values are quite kind of solid.
Yeah.
Overall, yeah. I didn't pick up on anything like that.
What do you make of Basinger?
I don't think Kim Basinger is a very good actor generally, and I don't think she's very strong in this either. And I agree with you. You kind of mentioned it there as a sort of throwaway remark that Ricci is dispatched too quickly.
Yeah.
Because she is probably the most interesting character in the movie.
Yeah.
It would have been nice to have her hang around.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if I've seen Basinger in anything else other than LA Confidential. I definitely haven't seen her
8 Mile.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, beyond Curtis Hanson's filmography, I haven't really seen her in anything. And I definitely haven't seen her in anything where she's burdened with carrying the film as she is here. And I don't think she can pull it off.
So a couple of things that I did like about it. One thing I loved about it is that sinister gargoyle that looks over the room. I thought that was very a nice subtle touch that was quite eerie. In principle, if not in execution, I liked the rats turning into Satan.
Oh yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, rats in general, and that great image of the top down view of Cody's bed, where there's just rats are swarming around the room. Yeah, that's really great.
So, what's your rating for this one?
3.
3?
Yeah,
that seems harsh.
Really?
Yeah, I'll go with 5.
Okay. Yeah, it's a 3.
Okay, so the only film that I could find that he was attached to between Bless the Child and his next film was a remake of The Secret Life of Walter Mitty for New Line Cinema. He was attached to that in March of 2000, but his next film was 2002's The Scorpion King.
He is dead! Just admit it, you smelly camel! I am your master now! You belong to me! He is dead! 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 You are alive! I knew it!
Right.
I was just saying to the camel, no one could kill our good friend Matthias.
Get on.
Why should I make it easy for you? You're sworn to kill me.
Others will die first.
That's comforting.
So who is your friend?
Memnon Sorcerer.
Memnon Sorcerer?
Right.
Are you insane? She's going to get us all killed.
Memnon will have to leave the safety of his palace to get her.
So you're going to use me first and then kill me. I feel so much better.
I could always do it the other way around and kill you first.
So where are we going?
The Valley of the Dead.
The Valley of the Dead? Nobody goes to the Valley of the Dead. That's why they call it the Valley of the Dead. Wait for me, please.
Okay, so The Scorpion King, written by Stephen Sommers, William Osborne, and David Hayter, from a story by Sommers and Jonathan Hales. Produced by Sean Daniel, James Jacks, Vince McMahon, Kevin Misher, and Stephen Sommers for WWF Entertainment and Alphaville Films, and distributed by Universal Pictures. Released in the US, UK, and Ireland in April of 2002. The film grossed $165 million internationally against a $60 million budget, and was inspired by the legendary Egyptian warrior, the Scorpion King. The film is set 5,000 years ago in the notorious city of Gomorrah, where evil ruler Memnon, played by Stephen Brand, is determined to lay waste to all the nomadic peoples of the desert. The few remaining tribes, never natural allies, have to unite or perish. Knowing their enemy relies on the visions of a sorceress named Cassandra, played by Kelly Hu, they hire a skilled assassin, Matthias, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, to eliminate the visionary. In the course of his attempted assassination, he discovers that the sorceress only cooperates with Memnon out of fear for her life, and the two escape into the desert, where together with the remaining tribes, led by Balthazar, played by Michael Clark Duncan, they plan their final confrontation with Memnon. So this is the first film in this episode that I hadn't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a comparatively low-budget spin-off of Stephen Sommers' The Mummy Returns, which I also hadn't seen before, but watched in preparation for this episode. Or watched, rather, in preparation for seeing The Scorpion King. But I needn't have bothered because The Scorpion King doesn't... Like, it's ostensibly a prequel, like a spin-off prequel, setting up the character as we encounter him at the beginning of The Mummy Returns. But when I finished watching The Scorpion King, I was like, what? Wait, that doesn't kind of line up with what I remember from The Mummy Returns. So I watched the opening of The Mummy Returns again, and the opening line of The Mummy Returns is something like, in the year, whatever, 3000 BC, fierce warlord, known only as the Scorpion King, led a ferocious army on a quest to conquer the known world. Right? So he's this, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great kind of figure at the beginning of The Mummy Returns, but at the end of this film, he's like a peacenik, because Cassandra says she foresees a long period of peace and prosperity, and he asks her, how long will it last?
Yeah.
And she says, well, nothing lasts forever. But there's no sense that, you could say, okay, well, yeah, all sorts of stuff could have happened to him and turned it, but it just sort of doesn't connect.
Sure, yeah.
It's not only an ellipsis, it leaves us off at a point that is the polar opposite of where The Mummy Returns picks
downright
up.
confusing.
Yeah, it is.
Russell's spoken since this film, I think, in an interview promoting I Am Wrath, so 14 years later, that in retrospect, what makes this film interesting from a production point of view is that it was made prior to studio demands for shared universe continuity. So it's a prequel without all that much to connect it to its preceding franchise films. And I suppose in retrospect, you can also take pleasure or interest in the goofy tone and the comparatively cheap-looking production values of a film like this in an age, that's become oversaturated by darkness and seriousness and whatever else, and portentousness. So forgive me if I sound like it's impossible to win me over, but this isn't really the kind of film I go for.
No, me either, really.
But I'll also admit that The Mummy isn't really my thing either.
Well, this is very different. Have you seen The Mummy?
I've seen The Mummy. I haven't seen The Mummy Returns.
Well, how did you make heads or tails of this?
Well, I didn't.
It's great. You know, I like The Mummy. I think the first Mummy is fun. I watched The Mummy Returns. I think it's kind of bloated and unfocused, and you know, suffers from like it's similar, like a typical kind of big budget sequel problems. But it also leaves a lot of the. I mean, there's a lot of horror imagery in The Mummy Returns, but it leaves a lot of the horror kind of structure behind.
Yeah.
And becomes more like a kind of fantasy adventure thing. This one, though, first of all, it's not what I expected, because it's not at all like The Mummy. This is not really a fantasy film, certainly not a horror film. This is like a action adventure B-movie.
Yeah.
This was written by Stephen Sommers, so you know, who wrote the first two Mummy films and The Great Deep Rising as well. You even have like Sommers' kind of tendency to include a kind of shrill, whining sidekick in the film, whose name in this one is Arpid,
and who we heard in the excerpt.
Yeah, Grant Heslov. Also, I mean, the Mummy films are both over 2 hours long. This one is 84 minutes plus credits.
Sure.
So it's very, very lean. It has a lot of the same kind of comedy. In fact, it's more comedic than either of the Mummy films, but the kind of comedy is pretty much the same. Maybe with a slightly more modern tone. You have like Grant Heslov is for some reason attempting to do an accent of some kind. Nobody else bothers. Everybody else just has English and American accents. And it's pretty much like non-stop action for 84 minutes.
It is. It's and well, I don't really go for the Mummy's merging of historical iconography with sort of fantasy horror. So a prequel that ups the lightness and the action should on paper go more my way. I don't really like this film though. I found myself sort of atomizing its various components in an effort to draw some positives from it. So, for instance, I was like, okay, itemize it. It's comedy, it's action, cinematography, and so on. So, is it funny? Not really. How's the action in service of a story whose comedy and stakes aren't interesting to me? Does it look good? Not especially. You know, I hate even entering that kind of mode of like, you know, breaking down but I was trying to get to grips with why it wasn't working for me. Do you find it funny? You probably find it hilarious, do you?
No, I mean I don't find the Mummy films hilarious either. I think Dwayne, like, this is, we should say this is The Rock's first lead role. Yeah. Like, and in fact, like I thought The Mummy Returns was, but he's only in the very beginning of it. He shows up at the end in CGI form,
right? In
a scene that is like frequently cited as like one of the worst CGI, worst moments of CGI of all time. It's in that kind of like moment of hubris in the early 2000s when they thought, oh yeah, we can just make CGI humans now. It's worth looking up the actual appearance of the Scorpion King at the end of The Mummy Returns. It's really, really bad. But no, I mean, I like Dwayne Johnson. I think he's charming, you know, in pretty much everything that he's in. He's rarely in good films, and yet he always elevates the material that he's involved with.
Yeah, there's somebody put it nicely on Letterboxd when they said The Rock has so much charisma that this film somehow didn't sink his career. Yeah. And I think that's testament to him as a star presence.
Like, there are little touches here and there that I think are, I mean, like, they're not laugh out loud funny, but I mean, like Michael Clarke Duncan in drag infiltrating the palace, the scene with the fire ants where he's trying to keep the fire ants, he's buried up to his neck in the sand and he's trying to keep the fire ants away, and he's doing what he can. He crushes one with his chin and he licks one up with his tongue and chews it, you know. There's little moments like that I thought were quite amusing. I think the action is fine. You know, I thought that the palace escape sequence was enjoyable, and I thought the palace infiltration sequence that follows at the end of the film was enjoyable. I mean, again, 84 minutes. Yeah.
There's something cumbersome about swordplay, I think, in general. Like the the heaviness of the swords, the physics of it, makes itself felt here, which you could argue is a strength, but it makes that climactic showdown. I don't know. It's sort of heavy in a way that it shouldn't be. It's not like the Adventures of Robin Hood or whatever. What do you make of? Well, one funny opening gag that I liked was the one-eyed brute in the extreme close-up in the first shot when he does that like Klaus Kinski thing of turning to camera and getting hit between the eyes immediately. I like that.
Yeah. I also liked the scene in the wishing well when Cassandra escapes. Is she naked?
Oh yeah,
she's naked, isn't she? And
right.
the kid throws the coin into the wishing well, and then she comes up out of the wishing well. Yeah. That was quite funny. I thought there's a really cool visual moment as well where the soldiers are moving through some sort of corridor, and we get a shot in profile of one of them with his shadow cast on the wall behind him. And then the shadow moves and takes off his headdress, and it's revealed that it's actually not his shadow, it's the shadow of the person behind him, who is Matthias. And then he, kills him. That was very, very cool, something that I have never actually seen before. I also like the scene with the snakes. You
know how I feel about snakes, though.
That was pretty cool as well, where Memnon is testing Cassandra's abilities. He feels that because she has she has claimed that she can't have sex or she'll lose her powers, but she's only said that so that she doesn't have to have sex with Memnon.
Yes.
So he thinks that she's now gone off and had sex with Matthias, and therefore she might have lost her powers. So he tests her by taking these 6 canisters, these urns, and putting king cobras in 4 of them, and then spinning the table around, and she has to telepathically or whatever intuit which urns are empty and put her hand into them. And then she does that once, and then she does it the next time and pulls it out, and there's a snake like wrapped around her arm, and she can control the snakes and stuff. That was pretty cool. And I also liked the final confrontation with Memnon, where he draws 2 swords and then just like momentarily dips them into the flames, and the blades of the swords then for the remainder of the quite long fight are just like burning. He has these 2 flaming swords. I don't know. I thought there was a sense of kind of like frivolous fun about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's and that feeling is assisted by anachronistic music, so it feels like an alternate universe rather than historical fantasy, or maybe that's what historical fantasy is actually. Yeah, I mean, what do you make of that? The sort of rock music that kicks in momentarily. I mean,
I like it.
Yeah,
and part of the tone of the comic interactions as well, being like feeling like completely anachronistic.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's like seems to be pitching itself almost like at a Conan the Barbarian kind of mode. It's not as good as that film by any stretch, but and that film is much more serious.
Mm-hmm.
This seems kind of like more catered toward kids or something, but
yeah. I do like how Dwayne The Rock Johnson propels himself to his feet from a position of lying on his back, and The Rock did that anyway in the wrestling ring, but it's also harks back to Freddy Krueger in Dream Warriors when he does it towards the end of that film. Like he sort of, I don't know what the move's called, like jumping to your feet from a lying position when you're lying down, like
I don't know.
Flipping yourself.
Do you know who's in this movie that is somebody that we talked about on our Halloween episode? Is Tyler Mane, who played Michael Myers in Rob Zombie's films.
Oh, really?
He plays the barbarian chieftain.
Oh, interesting.
I just saw his credit there on Wikipedia. Okay, all right. I don't have anything else to say about this.
I feel like your score is going to be generous. No, not generous, but it's a hard film to dislike. Nevertheless, I'm going to give it.
If this, let me put it this way: if this had been as long as the Mummy films, I wouldn't have liked it.
Yeah,
at all.
Yeah.
But it didn't. For me, it didn't outstay its welcome. It was just like front to back action, pretty much like The Rock is in every scene. It had nice little touches, enough nice little stylistic and conceptual touches that I wasn't. It never just felt like nobody cared about this and nobody put any imagination into it.
Sure.
So I would go with a 6.
Thought you might. I'm going to go 5.
All right. So now, strap in.
I am 14 years between this and the next film. So what was he attached to in the interim?
Okay, so in October of 2002, he was attached to direct a film called Way of the Rat at DreamWorks with Frank Darabont's Darkwoods production and Castle Rock production involved. And it was... he would have adapted the screenplay from the eponymous cross-gen comic book, a martial arts action-adventure set in Hong Kong that involves a young and acrobatic hero, a wise talking monkey, and a princess who's handy with blades. And then in January 2005, in an article about the remake of Tron, Variety mentioned that Chuck Russell was attached to direct an adaptation of the Black Cat comic book, which is not the Marvel one. It's a Harvey comic book character of a stunt woman who becomes a vigilante on the streets of Los Angeles. In June 2005, he was attached, and this is probably the most interesting of these projects for me, he was attached to direct a film for Chiller Films, which was to be a remake of 1978's Piranha, the Joe Dante film. He was going to rewrite the script using elements from a spec script called Killer Fish by Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger, plus the original script by John Sayles. And then in July of 2005, he was attached to direct a film called Point Thunder, a nuclear war drama for the Ruddy Morgan organization, which was about a new submarine rushed into service and the commander and lieutenant who have to fight an extraterrestrial force that is taking control of it. In April 2007, he was attached to direct an adaptation of the Mandrake comic, Mandrake the Magician from Defenders of the Earth, for the Baldwin Entertainment Group. In March of 2008, he was writing to direct Northern Lights, an action film set in the field of aerobatics, death-defying stunt flying. Northern Lights would have followed the adventures of 3 young pilots, each determined to be the best at extreme flying, which encompasses taking their planes to 10 Gs and 300 miles per hour upside down, 10 feet off the ground.
Oh, I love that kind of stuff.
What about Top Gun?
Nah, but flying and that, it's good, isn't it?
He said, we'll be incorporating real-time, world-class aerobatic performances with new visual effect technologies that will put the audience right in the pilot's seat. And Dean Devlin, the guy who's famous for working with Roland Emmerich, said Chuck has a complete grasp on how to bring the tremendous aerial action sequences to life, which complements a rich story. In July of 2009, he was in talks to direct a film based on T.J. Hooker. The TV series produced by Aaron Spelling debuted in 1982 on ABC and ran for 5 seasons, the last on CBS. William Shatner starred as a no-nonsense patrol sergeant. In November of 2009, he was set to direct a 3D reworking of Arabian Nights, an action-adventure with an estimated budget of $70 million to be financed by Inferno Entertainment, and that was ready to go. It was supposed to start shooting in April of 2010. In a new spin on the classic, the story follows a young commander who, after his king is killed in a palace coup, joins forces with Sinbad, Aladdin, and his genie to rescue Sherazade and her kingdom from dark powers. Russell said, through the use of a new generation of visual technologies, we will be able to quite literally take audiences around the world on a magic carpet ride. And then there's a big gap until October of 2014. I think he was attached to that Arabian Nights thing for quite a while. He was attached then to direct a crime drama called 5 Minutes to Live, which would have starred Wesley Snipes for Hannibal Pictures, which is a remake of the 1961 movie starring Johnny Cash and Vic Tayback as 2 thieves who conspire to rob a bank and hold the bank manager's wife hostage. This was just after Wesley Snipes got out of prison for tax evasion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was so that's October 2014, and his next film was 2016's I Am Wrath.
It's good to see you eating again.
Yeah, well, I feel a bit better. I spoke to an old buddy of mine, and he kind of put things in perspective for me.
Who?
Well, you wouldn't know him. He's just an old friend, but he said, Stan, these street guys, they're all gonna end up dead soon enough. And maybe you should just let the police do their job.
Oh, one can only hope. Hey, I'm gonna pack up some of Mom's stuff. I think it'd be a good idea to get it out of the house, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if Mike and I can borrow the Explorer, we could come by tomorrow before his shift.
Okay, well, then just leave the keys on the hook.
Perfect.
Oh, that's him. I told him I'd see him today, so I should probably get going.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get the check.
I Am Wrath, written by Ivan Gaultier and Paul Sloan, was produced by Rob Carliner, Michael Mendelsohn, Richard Salvatore, and Nick Vallelonga for Hannibal Classics, March On Productions, Patriot Pictures, and Vallelonga Productions. Distributed by Saban Films, 101 Films Limited, and Lionsgate Films. It made $2.5 million from an $18 million budget, and it was released to video or internet on 15th of April 2016 in the US. Racked with guilt after the brutal death of his wife, played by Rebecca De Mornay, Stanley Hill, played by John Travolta, inflicts his own brand of revenge after the killers escape justice. And I should add that he does so with his old pal Dennis, played by Christopher Maloney. I hadn't seen this before. I don't think you had seen this before.
No.
I mean, one of the strengths for you of The Scorpion King was that it was mercifully short.
Mm-hmm.
This is also a film that, doesn't really outstay its welcome, if it was welcome to begin with. It's pretty, bracingly action-packed and whatever else. It's a, vigilante film in which John Travolta, your pal, gets to play sort of a late Liam Neeson type.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
I more or less enjoyed it.
Give me the less before the more.
Well, I mean, like I said, I don't like John Travolta generally, and I don't like him here. I think he's unconvincing.
He's hilariously bad, isn't he?
I wouldn't quite go that far, but he's...
I would.
Like, most of the reviews on Letterboxd, where everybody's giving it like half a star and 1 star, seem to just be like, his hair was funny, or something like that. A lot of like 1-sentence reviews, like half a star, your hair is so funny. To the extent that I was thinking, like, if somebody other than John Travolta was in the lead here, would this film have such a low reputation?
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I think it's a perfectly serviceable B movie.
I agree. I mean, I was reading the Outlaw Vern's review of it on outlawvern.com, and Vern says, there are things to like about it. Ultimately, I think he comes down on the side of not feeling overly convinced by the film as a whole. But he says the one goofy part that gave me a chuckle is Stanley's attempts to be cool when he's snooping around. The best example is when he's trying to track down the killer through a tattoo artist. He comes in near closing time and asks, "Too late for a tat?" At no point do we see any previous ink on his body, but he's trying to act like he goes into tattoo shops all the time. He knows the drill. He talks about tattoos so much that it would be a huge waste of time to pronounce both syllables, and the only way to live a full life of enjoying tattoos is to abbreviate the word. And I think that almost sort of extends to Travolta as an actor as well. Very, very difficult to take seriously as a kind of like no-nonsense former, black ops operative or whatever he is. And I actually find his old pal Dennis, played by Christopher Maloney, the much more sort of charismatic of the two.
Oh yeah, definitely. So this is like, a lot of people saying like this is like his Taken or whatever. It's more like, it's more Death Wish really than Taken.
Sure.
And actually, the film that I think it's a direct cash-in on is John Wick, which came out in 2014, and there's a nightclub scene in John Wick that everybody talks about, really impressive, and there's they don't do the sort of the gun fu stuff that they do in John Wick, but there's a nightclub action set piece in this one as well that's kind of very obviously cribbing from John Wick. I mean, like, so I expected this to be terrible, and I was surprised. Like, I was enjoying the formulaic setup, while also being a little bit worried that it was going to lose me as it went on. I really thought the initially inexplicably antagonistic police were really funny. his wife's just been murdered, and they seem to have no sympathy or understanding for him at all, and they're just like hassling him, and like, you know, they let his wife's killer walk free, and he objects, and they shut him down. You know, like it's pretty funny. So yeah, I mean, I suppose what I felt ultimately overall was that I would prefer to be watching an 80s film of this type than this film, where the action might be inferior, but the tone and the sensibility would be superior.
Sure.
Because the action in this is good.
Yeah, there's a clarity to it, and you know, you can see that the actors are performing it, which is always nice. And I mean, you know, Vern picks up on the one shot in the tattoo parlor actually, where, you know, John Travolta's like fucking launching a guy across the cash desk, and you know, it's framed in such a way that you can actually see what's happening. And I agree, it is pleasingly economic, spatially and otherwise. There's a thing to do with lighting and frame rates and sound design, like the acoustic or the sonic, the timbre of people's voices, particularly in interior spaces, betray, I don't know, like is it studio bound, or there's something about the tinny qualities of it that it feels very, B-movie-ish. Again, not necessarily a criticism, but
it's just a bit to leap in there.
But, yeah, aesthetically, so that frame rate thing, digital thing that I've just mentioned, you could argue it's like something it's there in something like Universal Soldier Regeneration, which looked texturally like a direct-to-TV movie, but which formerly had a sustained intensity. This has a caperish feel rather than intensity, I would say. Like two old dudes, you know, Travolta himself being out of practice, or his character at least, and then his pal shows up to keep him on track. It's an odd tone to go for, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite light.
And nevertheless, you know, starts with like a brutal killing. You know, Rebecca De Mornay, like in this thankless role, who's just killed off in an underground car park. And I liked Russell's decision to sort of, there's an extended pullback from that scene of Travolta clutching his suddenly dead wife. It's either a Steadicam or a gimbal, but he pulls back. It reminded me of that the really brutal beating, the violent scene in A Room for Romeo Brass, when Shane Meadows does something very similar. He pulls back, so simultaneously the camera doesn't interrupt its gaze from this atrocious act, but at the same time is like physically moving back from it. It's a nice framing device, but it's also evocative of underscoring the particularities of the violence by the surrounding physical landscape, which I like.
What I'd like to know is, again, looking at the comments on Letterboxd, I'd love to know what people mean when they say that the film should have been made 20 years ago. Because does that mean we've moved past this kind of material and now it's dated? Or does it mean they don't make them like they used to?
Yeah. So, is it
like essentially they're saying
more films like this, or
no? Because it's saying
20 years too late.
This should have been made 20 years ago. Meaning, if they make these kind of films today, they're not as good as the films of this type that they made 20 years ago. Or
I get you, yeah.
They never should have made these films.
Yeah.
Is it kind of nostalgic, or is it sort of superior and judgmental?
I mean, which of those two sentiments would you agree with? If you would.
Neither, really. Certainly not. We've moved past this and it's dated. But like I said, I mean, this film is by all appearances anyway, it's a cash in on John Wick, the success of John Wick.
Sure.
Like it's Death Wish and a little bit of Taken with the kind of the aging star coming in.
Mm-hmm.
John Wick, even I mean, I don't know if the film had a poster as such, but the graphic used on, like, you know, iTunes and stuff, the font is evocative of Mission Impossible. You know, so it's like,
yeah,
it's just like one of those B movies that's just like riding the coattails of bigger successful films. And I say that without any sort of sense of criticism or anything like that. That's just what it is. And yeah, I mean, I think it's fine. It's like, it's violent, it's amusing, it's workmanlike, nuts and bolts revenge thriller that gets the job done. And one question I have is the governor, who's the main bad guy. He kind of surprisingly turns into like a bit of a badass at the end. He's like fighting with this guy whose deadly skills have been demonstrated throughout the movie.
Yeah.
And he's just like the governor. Because I was wondering that at the beginning. I was like, Travolta's character is introduced to us as an automobile engineer. I was like, his deadly skills? Like, when are these deadly skills going to kick in? Give it some sort of explanation for this.
Yeah, when he smashes through his wall and reveals like a fucking suitcase full of guns and fucking.
Well, that's taken from John Wick as well, where John Wick has buried his guns and he like has to break through the floor to get them out.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd rather watch John Wick. This has
I haven't seen John Wick.
Brutality or something that John Wick doesn't have, though. I don't know.
Yeah, as Vern puts it, no wife, no way to stop him from killing again. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, with the caveat, and I guess it's not a deal breaker, but it is a caveat nevertheless.
Travolta's hair.
It's, I mean, it's not his hair, but it's somebody's hair.
Is it a hairpiece or is it plugs?
I'm not sure, but somebody referred to it like the animal that Travolta's wearing in this film. This is on Letterboxd. Is like a hollowed out raccoon. Yeah, it's but anyway, the caveat that I was going to add is that I agree with everything you're saying. Gets the job done without being particularly emotionally involving. Like, I feel like a vigilante film, the villain should be better fleshed out so that there's a sort of catharsis added to his final takedown or whatever.
Sure, that would take it into like very good territory, probably.
Sure, yeah.
But it's I don't necessarily require that, though. I mean, like the like I said, I was enjoying the formulaic nature of it, and the minor variations on the formula.
Mm-hmm.
I just like these kinds of films, I suppose. It's just one of those things where I've seen a lot of them, and I'm not saying this is a great example of the genre, but it's serviceable.
Yeah, and so long as they'll make entries into this genre, you'll continue to watch them, right?
Yeah.
Because you're a fiend for bad films.
Would you say that you have an aversion to kind of B movies and a certain attitude toward things that go straight to video or are produced for television?
Well, I'm a man of high taste, aren't I? So
yeah, you're on your decline.
Well, fucking 13 episodes into the Journeymen, I should be well into the decline. It's an active, ongoing process of diseducating myself from the cultural assumptions that I sort of inherited from, my early days of cinephilia, I guess. I never grew up on, trashy films or B movies or whatever, however else you want to refer to them as. And the more I watch and get to grips with them critically, the less inclined I am to imply derision with my, semantic choices or whatever.
Well, what type of what age were you when you became what you would describe as a cinephile?
37. No, I'm 16.
Okay, and prior to that, if you were to rent a movie
14.
at the weekend, what type of movie would you have rented?
Oof. I don't know. I mean, I remember...
Mine would have been crime, thriller, horror, action.
Yeah, like Demolition Man, RoboCop,
comedy as well.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Like violent, like Cliffhanger.
Sure.
That kind of like, star-led action vehicle.
Yeah, me too.
That was like violent and everything else.
And not comedy.
Well, I don't like humour.
That's true.
I'm a very humorless chap. Famously. But yeah, so my points of reference going into a film like this aren't as wide as yours demonstrably are. Like, so I haven't seen Death Wish, haven't seen John Wick, and so paradoxically, I think maybe enjoy this film less as a result because I don't see its points of departure, or I'm unable to kind of position it within a particular kind of film.
Yeah. Okay, well, out of 10?
6.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so since I Am Wrath came out in 2016, Russell has been attached to direct a fantasy adventure movie called The Seven Sins for Tyrant One Imperium Pictures. The project is based on John Land's books The Seven Sins, The Tyrant Ascending, and Black Scorpion, The Tyrant Reborn, which are based on the Michael Tirano character created by Fabrizio Baccardi, a self-made Italian businessman. Russell said, "The books have the grit, glamour, and dark side of Las Vegas, but what makes them unique is their hero, Michael Tirano. Orphaned as a boy in Sicily when his family was slaughtered by his father's enemies, Michael fought his way to the top of the gaming world, opened his own casino, and he's forced to rise to a greater calling by his possession of an ancient medallion that guides his destiny. He becomes a new kind of superhero, drawn into a life of vigilantism as the forces which destroyed his family in Italy years ago now threaten his empire in Vegas." And Baccardi said, "We chose Chuck Russell because I believe he is a very talented writer-director, and he immediately understood what this property aims to be and all it can be." So I don't know, presumably that's still in development, but his next film, which is going to be released next year, is I believe Indian-Thai co-production called Jungli, which stars Vidyut Jamwal, who is an Indian martial artist, and it's described as a family adventure film revolving around Vidyut Jamwal's character, a vet who, on returning to his father's elephant preserve, encounters and fights an international poacher's racket. So we'll cover that next year at some point.
Absolutely, and it will probably be in my top 10 anticipated films on our end of year review. Have you seen a trailer for it, for Jungli?
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it. It looks, well, tonally and otherwise, the polar opposite of I Am Wrath.
Sure.
Which is interesting in itself.
Okay, are we going to rank these movies now?
Yeah, I guess we are.
So we've got 7 films, so do you want to give me your bottom 2?
Okay, so number 7 is Bless the Child, 3 out of 10, and number 6, 6 and 5 are pretty interchangeable, but I'm going to go number 6, Eraser, 5 out of 10.
Ooh, okay. My number 7 is Bless the Child, 5 out of 10, and my number 6 is The Scorpion King, 6 out of 10.
So my number 5, sorry, what am I giving you? My number 5 to...
543.
543. So number 5 is Scorpion King, 5 out of 10. As I said, 5 and 6 were kind of interchangeable. Number 4 would be I Am Wrath, 6 out of 10. And number 3 is The Blob, 8 out of 10.
Ooh, big jump. Number 5 for me is I Am Wrath, 6 out of 10. Number 4 is Eraser, 6 out of 10. And number 3 is The Blob, 7 out of 10. I think it's going to be interesting here. Oh no, wait, I know, never mind.
Yeah, I know what your number 1's going to be. Number 2 for me is The Dream Warriors, 8 out of 10. And so my favourite Chuck Russell film thus far is The Mask, 9 out of 10.
Okay, well my number 2 is The Mask, 9 out of 10. And my number 1, Forever and Always, is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, alright.
Okay, so you've been listening to episode 12 of The Journeymen. My name's Michael Pattison. I've been here with...
Bobby Lowe.
Please follow us on Twitter @_Journeymen and subscribe to us through SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, or YouTube. And if you like listening to us, please continue to share. You can also leave comments on our page. You can email us at journeymenfilmpodcast@gmail.com now. And we look forward to hearing whatever feedback you have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.